Hi there, it's May the 20th and we're continuing our journey through the Good News of John, and we're in John chapter 11 reading from verses 1 to 54. This is a momentous chapter in the Good News of John. This is the account of Jesus raising his friend Lazarus from the dead. And the reason it's pivotal is because it really is the preface to, well, it's the culmination of his wonders and his miracles, but it's also the preface to his being arrested and his being crucified. So this is a very important chapter. There's many key things happening here. First of all, we hear that Lazarus is ill. Lazarus is the brother of Mary and Martha. We're told that Mary is the one who anointed Jesus with oil and who wiped his feet with her hair, and that they live in the village of Bethany, which is about 2 miles from Jerusalem. So it's in Judea. So when Jesus hears, and remember, Jesus is not in Judea at this point. Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick, but he doesn't go for 2 days. And perhaps the disciples think he's not going because of the danger he would face if he goes to Judea, which they refer to in a few moments. But Jesus stays, and then he waits, and he says 2 days later, now he says, we will go. And there kind of is a discussion with the disciples about why he's going now. And he says, well, Lazarus is sleeping. And so they say, well, if he's sleeping, we can wake him up, you can heal him. But then Jesus is telling them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And so they're wondering why he's going then to Judea, which is a dangerous place for him. And actually Thomas kind of jokes, he quips, he says, well, let's go, and we'll die as well, because Jesus is being pursued by the Pharisees and the leaders. So they go to Bethany, and there first Martha meets them coming out of the house. Mary stays at home. And Martha says to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Now, at this point, Lazarus has been buried for 4 days, so we know that it's quite a journey to get from where Jesus was to get to Bethany. And Jesus arrives after he'd been in the tomb 4 days. But Jesus says, do you believe that you believe he will rise? And then Martha says, I believe he'll rise in the great resurrection, which of course every Jew believed in and confessed in the God who raises from the dead. But then Jesus says something really dramatic and really provocative. It's one of his ego eimi, one of his I ams. Ego eimi I anastasis ke zoe. I am the resurrection and the life. That the actual resurrection is vested in him. That the life of God is vested in him. And Martha confesses him as the Christ. She says, you're the Christ, you're Messiah, you're the Son of the living God. God will give you what you ask. And then as they come to Bethany, he meets Mary. Martha gets Mary, and Mary says the same thing to him. Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Jesus is impacted deeply by seeing the grief over death of Mary and of her friends, a tragic situation, the loss. And actually Lazarus would have been the provider for these sisters as well. So he's seeing their fear and their worry about being unprovided for now that their brother has died. And Jesus' heart of compassion goes out to them. In fact, so much so that he goes to the tomb where Lazarus has been laid. And he weeps in one of the shortest verses in the scriptures. It says, Jesus wept. And therefore, tears are actually sanctified for us, especially for men. Because Jesus sheds tears, there's no shame in weeping, and Jesus actually weeps, even given the fact that he's about to do something amazing, something miraculous in raising Lazarus from death. So Jesus calls for the stone that is across the tomb to be removed. And the Martha, being very practical, says, Jesus, he'll be stinking. He's been in the grave 4 days. Bodies quickly disintegrate in that heat and in that climate. But Jesus says, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And so they roll the stone back, and then Jesus cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Zevraixo, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man who has been dead, now made alive, comes out of the tomb, bound in his grave clothes still, and Jesus says, release him and let him go. Imagine the incredible power of this, of witnessing this event. And it says that because of this, many of the Judeans believe on Jesus and they trust him. However, a number of them see implications for this, and they go to the Pharisees and they report back to the Pharisees what Jesus has done. The Pharisees and the chief priests, far from being amazed and far from responding to Jesus in faith, they now respond politically. They are filled with worry. They're saying this man is doing so many miracles, he's leading the people astray, and this is going to create a political upheaval. The Romans are going to come, they're going to take away our holy place, they're going to come and take away the temple, they're going to take over our country, we're going to be back at square one from years ago in our place of suffering for our faith. And so they decide that Jesus has to die. And in fact, Caiaphas, the high priest, says something prophetically. He says it's better for one man to die than for the whole nation to be affected. And of course, in saying that, he's just confessing the fact that Jesus is about to die as a sacrifice for the sins of the world, not just for his own people, but for the sins of the world. And so the scene is set then for Jesus to be arrested. However, Jesus takes himself away from their immediate grasp and he goes to a village called Ephraim and he remains there. But we're coming into the place where Passover is coming, this time that Jesus has set aside. Jesus knows that this will be his time. At the time of the marking of the deliverance from Egypt, he is going to deliver the whole world from the power of sin. Jesus is the one who has in himself the power of resurrection and the power of life. If we trust in him, he says, anyone who believes in me will never die. Even though we experience physical death, the mortality of our bodies, he says that there will be a survival, there will be a conscious life unlimited beyond the grave. This is his amazing promise, and this is what he invites us to trust in today. Have a very good May the 20th.